Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Natalie from Creative Makers. I'm happy that you're here. And it's been a few weeks. I hope you all had a really good holiday. I did.
Me too.
I did. Anyway, I'm here this morning with Chloe Allred. And she was a fantastic painter that I just saw maybe in November at a show nearby. Hello, four people. Hello, Kathleen.
Yay!
Hello, yay! I always love it when people, at least a couple, show up while we're doing this. It makes it easier for me. Anyway, I met Chloe at this show. Her work was up. It was fantastic. It was blowing me away, and so I wanted to make sure that I got to talk to her. So here we are. Without further ado, this is Chloe Allred.
Hello.
Hi.
Yay.
Okay, so let's make oh good. Here I am.
Yay.
Here you are on my pad. That's great. We'll just but no, I don't want to hear you talk here. That's great. Okay, good.
There we go.
All right. All right. So I'm going to start this the way I start this for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I always ask is I want to know what creativity looked like for you as a kid. How did it start?
Yeah, well, I would say some of my earliest memories go back to like drawing and painting. Like the classic, like my parents making me like covered in finger paint sort of thing, running around naked as like a 3-year-old. But I feel like I've always kind of used art as a way to try to understand things. When I was really little, that was a lot of like, I would play these like imagination games.
Mm-hmm.
So I would play these kind of fantasy games with my friends, and I was always kind of like designing the characters and drawing out the world. And I was just sort of a voracious drawer. Yeah.
And it sounds like you had a big imagination too.
Definitely. Yeah. And it was like the paper gave me a place to put all of those thoughts. And I also just really fell in love with art and visual imagery. It was really impacted by, like the children's books that my parents would get me, and seeing like fantastical images. And it's just something that, like, I'm one of those people that I've like always loved drawing, and it's been like a sort of just constant passion for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in school, I take it you were the art kid?
Yeah, I was definitely like
right?
Yes, it was just something that I took a lot of pride in,
Singled out all the time. Let's have Chloe do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Chloe
Yeah, my cousins would do that too, and there were a lot of like things that as a kid there were a lot of kind of difficult parts to my life. I kind of my home situation wasn't very stable. I From the time that I was pretty little was like bullied for my weight, and then my mom was also really anorexic herself, and a lot of that was projected onto me. And so I had a lot of things I really didn't like about myself, but art was this thing that felt like a special like talent of mine, and it was something that gave me some type of confidence. And then it also became, for me, a place where I could start to process some of the really difficult things that I was going through, especially as I developed an eating disorder really young. And that, I feel like my drawing and my art became a way for me to like navigate out of that.
First of all, I want to say I'm really sorry to hear about that
Yeah.
stuff, because I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I had a very similar.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, I take it then you were drawing out your problems.
Yeah, definitely. And so when I was really little, it was like using, I think, a lot of fantasy and an imagination as a means of like escape a bit, And then what I also started to turn to was doing a lot of drawing from direct observation. So Yeah, I do a lot of self-portraits, and people are always like, why do you do so many self-portraits?
We were gonna get there, yeah.
Yeah, and part of that started when I was 11 or 12. I did my first kind of portrait from direct observation, so from the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was in the kind of throes of anorexia. I had lost a ton of weight, and I felt very isolated and lost, and it was just really, really dark, right? And I was used to just looking at myself in the mirror and just sort of hurling insults at myself, right? And what happened when I stopped and I drew myself from direct observation is that drawing makes you slow down. And instead of just jumping to a conclusion, you start really looking at something.
You have to really see.
Yeah, you have to really see. And so that self-portrait became a place where, instead of judging myself in a negative way, I started to really start to see myself, and also start to see like how destructive that like starvation was, and how sad I was. And it started to become a way for me to, process those feelings. And it's still something that, it's still a tool that I use for, navigating my emotions, navigating like negative body image. It gives me a place to like think about that in like a safe way, if that makes sense.
It sounds like you've spent a lot of time working on that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you found a way that works for you.
Yeah.
To get things out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then later combined with like therapy, but yeah.
But it's the hardest part. The hardest part is even knowing that you have something that you have to get out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Being able to place it in some way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also like placing it outside of yourself, where it's not just sort of festering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in school, you were the art kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I take it there was always a focus towards art. You were probably, if there were art classes available, you were probably migrating towards them at all times.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, definitely. Later in high school, I had a really fantastic and strange art teacher named Pat Eddington, and he was very like whimsical, very encouraging of my art. And I got to a point where I could, in my schedule, I was able to do back-to-back art classes. So I could just be in the art studio there for, hours and hours. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was just like it was definitely like a great means for me to just understand myself and understand the world.
Yeah. At that point, was there any doubt in your mind that you were going to do anything other than art? I mean, did you have some other idea, like art's great, but I'm going to, be a doctor or anything?
No, I mean, I definitely, I became, in middle school and high school, I became really obsessed with my academics. I started doing, like all sort of like honors and advanced placement classes. And I had other things that I loved. Like I found environmental science really fascinating, and like world history. But there was kind of never any doubt for me that art was the thing that I really wanted to be the sort of center point of my life. Mm-hmm. It's, for me too, it's like making art helped me get to, it's kind of like a meditation, right? When I've had, and this can even just be brief times of not being able to create very much, it gives me a bit of anxiety, right? So it's a place where, and we can even hear it in how I talk about it. I think of art as like a place for me. Like it puts me into like a state of mind that gives me a lot of like peace and stability, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And I've just, it's one of those things where ever since I was a little kid, I sort of knew that I wanted to be an artist. And I sort of told myself at different points in my life, like, oh, well, I'll be an animator, because someone gave me that idea.
Oh, so you
And
would
yeah.
take it into different venues, but it was
Yeah.
always within the realm of art.
Yeah. And, then later it was like, I don't really want to be an animator, but, and it, and also like I was able to, go to art school in Seattle. My senior year of high school, I worked really hard on this scholarship application, and I ended up getting a full tuition scholarship to Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle.
Oh, that's great. I was just going to ask you, so what college did you end up going to?
Yeah. So I applied for this scholarship, the Robert B. McMillan Scholarship, and that's for any school in Washington or Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Originally I was going to go to a different school, but then I decided on Cornish, and that was also just a really incredible experience. I grew up in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and I think it was really positive for me to be able to like go away from home, be in a totally different place, just be surrounded by other artists. With the scholarship, it pretty much covered everything outside of like my living expenses, and so that also just gave me the time to be able to just focus on making things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there that I really started painting for the first time, which at first was hugely uncomfortable.
I was gonna say, especially if you're only used to drawing. Once you start to add color, everything changes, and then a brush on top of that. I mean, it's not the same level of control.
Well, and it's like the color, but also it's the body of the paint.
Mm-hmm.
With acrylic and with oil, you're dealing with a physical body to it. And so having to like contend with also thinking in a different way. There's like that thickness, and then you're also thinking more in layers and building up an image.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't all happen all in one brush stroke.
No, and the beginning can look very, weird. And so there can be a sort of like trusting the process a little bit,
I feel like lots of artists don't know that it doesn't happen all at once, and that the thought of layering isn't something that they're used to thinking about, that it goes down looking blocky and weird, you know?
And now as a painting professor, I I help my own students through that journey. It's like, I know this looks weird right now.
Right.
I know you have to trust me a little bit though, and we'll sort of get through the process together. Yeah.
So were you intimidated in college?
Yeah. Well,
I was going to say, probably in layers too. I mean, working in a medium that you're not used to working in, and then being around other artists who all deserve to be there just as much as you did.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think is like, and I think it was actually like a great experience to go through, even though it was sort of painful. I went from being the sort of like standout artist at my high school, and then when you go especially to like an art program, you're surrounded by all of the other people that were that same thing.
Everybody's an art star.
Yeah. But that's like, that's a great position to be put into, because then suddenly it's not so much about your ego anymore, right? It's about like, okay, so like, how do I actually improve and gain skills and get better, and how do I kind of like figure out what I want to do with my creativity, And there can be kind of like some of that ego where you get kind of competitive with other people, but I think that can be positive to get to a point where like your idea of yourself as the art star shatters, right? And then you have to be like, okay, what do I want to build myself into? Yeah.
When you were in school, was your focus primarily painting, or was it pretty diversified?
So the first year at Cornish was just like a foundation year, and we did all different things, including like way more conceptual things that were completely outside of my realm of like thinking about what art is, right? Like Cornish was much more conceptual than I knew, or I had an idea of like what art school meant, and then they were doing kind of different things, which I think was interesting. But so that foundation year was all different types of things. And then after that, you chose concentrations. And so you would go from like 3 concentrations, and then you could narrow down as you went into your upper years.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really settled on was drawing, doing a ton of like figure drawing in particular, printmaking, and then painting.
Oh, which comes out, all three come out in your work.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you graduated from there. Did you go
Mhm.
on to get an MFA?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I took 2 years off. And that's also when I started really like teaching for the first time, starting with like little kids.
Mhm.
And then I realized that I really wanted the option to be able to teach at the college level. And so, and I also, I really enjoyed my experience at Cornish, but I wanted the chance to go deeper into figurative art specifically,
Mhm.
and to be able to study with more artists and professors that really focused on figurative art and figurative painting. Because at Cornish I didn't have a lot of that. I had one professor, Francesca Sudston, who is this incredible painter and sort of like in a surrealist vein, who made incredible figurative work. But my other painting professors were just had very diverse work, and it was their focus was much more kind of conceptual versus doing like hands-on demonstrations or talking about how to like paint the body. And so I decided to go to Laguna College of Art and Design, which has a very like figurative art focused program.
Where is Laguna?
It's in Laguna Beach.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, that
yeah.
makes sense. There's a big art community there too.
Yeah, and they have just kind of a huge roster of artists that you can work with in the MFA program. A lot of them also just they live in Los Angeles, so there's like you can sample from that community, you know. And it kind of came down to, for me, like I applied to like several programs, but with Laguna, it was looking at like the roster of artists and just the like diversity, and like I became so excited looking at all these artists' work. Like specifically who later became my mentor and friend, Sharon Alicati, is an incredible artist. And I remember looking at her website and just being like, oh my gosh, like so excited. And then I met her at the first like mentor mixer event, and now she's like a very close friend of mine. This helped me get multiple teaching jobs and stuff.
It's always nice when you have a teacher whose work actually inspires you.
Yeah,
you know?
Major. Yeah, and that's something I actually talk to my students about now, because it wasn't something that I hadn't really had a conversation like that with anybody when I was first deciding on where to go for art school, you know. But I think it's like a really important thing to start to think about, like, you know, whose work really interests you, makes you like want to like nerd out, you know. And yeah.
So once you finished your MFA, I mean, I know you wanted to go directly into teaching on a college level, correct? Now, did you spend any time entertaining the thought, well, maybe I'd like to just be a gallery shown artist?
I mean, I guess like I've thought about that. It's that feels a lot more like that path feels a lot more opaque to me.
In what way?
It's
interesting.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, getting gallery representation just itself, like that's like, that feels like a very opaque process.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of hang around the gallery, right? And you try not to come across as like desperate and weird.
Yeah, like some sort of creep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, how do you do that? And you like, okay, so it's like, we'll go to the openings and just try to insert yourself. And it's just, it doesn't always feel like there's a clear path forward on that.
Right. There's no application to be represented, which I
No.
feel like that would be so much nicer if they were just like, would you like to be represented? Fill us out this application and send us, 10 pieces of your work.
Yeah.
So that we can see what you're about, and then
Right.
we'll decide whether we want to represent you. But a lot of times I don't know.
They might just get like flooded by way too many. I don't know, but it's so it feels like personality is like a big part of that, you know? And I mean, there's galleries I would love to be represented by, but it also feels like something that can take a lot of time to develop, right?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not overnight, and you do have to just keep showing up.
Yeah.
And making friends and sort of like inserting yourself into the artist community that's there associated with the gallery. Right. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that would be great. I'm not represented by a gallery right now, and I would like that because I don't particularly love, trying to sell my own work, to be honest.
I'm not sure I know very many artists that actually do enjoy it. It's a hard thing, putting yourself out there and saying, I've got this, and this is how much money it is, and I made it, and where rejection means so much, in all kinds of levels.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's, I think a lot of artists feel this, where it's like, for me too, like a big part of it is like making the piece and the process and getting into that. And that's like what I really care about. And I care about the final product, but, I don't know. It's harder trying to treat myself as like a brand to package. I just have some like resistance to that.
Well, I think that's sort of like a thing that's happened in the last 10 years, maybe, becoming a brand, having an identity.
With social media.
Yeah, social media has definitely created all of that. Having a logo for yourself, the whole deal, right?
Yeah, which I don't know, just for my work and like the type of work that I care about making, it's hard for me for it to come from that place.
Yeah.
For me, it's much more like I need to work from an expansive place, and allowing myself to like also surprise myself with the images I make versus like, let me make sure it fits into this,
right?
And I also like what I just saw, especially through like the different artists that I met through, especially LCAD. Was artists making a living through a combination of things. So both through like maybe gallery representation, selling their work, but also teaching. And I think there's the potential for a symbiotic relationship there, I know that it is for me, like that teaching I find really interesting. I love having discussions with students and or they're creating work and it surprises me and inspires me, and I think for me too, it's also really healthy for me to have scheduled time where I'm like out of the studio with other people, like in community, and the two just like flow together really well. I think sometimes when I have too much time in my hands and I get into like a little bit of a weird studio hermit mode.
I think I think this is an issue that a lot of artists have. I just
Mm-hmm.
saw an artist that I adore post something just recently that it was just like, I spent a lot of time alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure it's necessarily good, and I get
Yeah.
pretty weird about it.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that. And I always
Yeah.
worry about that even for myself, because
Yeah.
I have a day job, and part of me is like, I like having a day job because I would be the person in my studio working all the time, and then when I went to the supermarket, I'd be the one.
You're like, I can't even talk to people
I would be like talking to the cashier. Hi, how you doing? What'd you do today?
Like,
Was it fun?
Yeah.
What else is going on? I would
Totally. You're like, my social skills have just crashed.
Yeah, exactly. I would be the weird old lady that talks to everybody. I don't need that.
Yeah.
Here, speaking of which, let me see what people are saying here. All right, Anthony Villarreal's here, Marshall Lovelace, Kathleen, Lupe Montiel, Sandra Vista, Tina, and Joel are all watching. They just said hi, but nobody's asked any questions yet. Feel free to jump in. I will be looking at this periodically. Okay, so I totally feel you when you say, like, finding inspiration through your students and being out with everybody else and just trying to understand what everybody else is focusing on other than yourself.
And with teaching, it makes you, with whatever subject you're teaching, I mean, whether that's like printmaking or art history, you have to think about ways like, oh, how do I understand this? And then you have to think about taking that thing and explaining it from several different vantage points, right? Because when you're in the classroom, you have all these different people coming from different places that think in different ways. And so it challenges you to think about whatever you're working with in this really like fleshed out way. And for myself, like, I definitely found that by like teaching both like painting, printmaking, drawing, it's made me a much better artist.
Right.
And it's made me understand and think about these things in a deeper way. Because of like thinking about like, well, how do I explain this to people?
I was going to say, I think verbalizing it too, because now you're making it super concrete. It's not just in your head with like, I'm going to draw a line, Now you're like, why do I draw that line?
Yeah. Yeah. And I create a lot of demo videos for my students. So I'm putting myself through the process and thinking about how do I explain it to them. I do a ton of demos in class. And those are always really interesting too, because then as you're doing things in class, people have questions in the moment, and that might also send you off onto showing them something else.
Yeah.
I actually have a painting over there of
the
Bride of Frankenstein.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, and that completely came out of I'm gonna put this down on the ground first. Yeah. Okay. So actually, first there was a Frankenstein painting that I did. I sold that though, so that's
here.
all.
I'm just gonna bring this forward so they can see what we're talking about. Bride of Frankenstein.
So that completely came out of wanting to do a grisaille, a grayscale painting demo for my students, and then doing glazing demos. And so there was a day in class where I was having my intermediate painting students do this glazing portrait piece, and all of my students showed up, and I could just sense the energy. They were all very frustrated, right? They all were just like, we don't know how to do this. Like, they had been trying with the glazing, and so I ended up doing this much more kind of like long scale demo with them, being like, okay, like, let's like really get into this together. Like, this is how I'm putting out the paint and putting in a little bit of medium, but actually not as much as you might think. And I'm taking this and I'm like scrubbing it into the surface. And then I'm going over that with like a really soft brush, and really that helps it just like sink down. And being able to like go over kind of every single step with them and show them in real time. It's like with all of them, I saw this point where it was like, you could just like see the click happening, right?
See the flip.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like the kind of thing, like as as a professor, like you have to be like tuned into that, right?
Yeah.
Like sensing like, okay, I can see the frustration. Let's like slow this way down and like really get into it. And, I'll do it. And then now I want to see you try it. And like,
So this was a demo piece.
that actually came after. I first did a demo, and this was like right around Halloween. And a student walked in with this little plate that he had with a Frankenstein photo on it. And we were going to do grisaille portraits that day. And I had been thinking, like, who do I want to paint? And I had some references printed. And then my student Steve walked in with this Frankenstein photo, and I was like, oh, that's
the one.
Yeah, I gotta do that. And so I did a Frankenstein, and I did Frankenstein for the glazes. And then this I actually just I started on my own. So I did the Frankenstein painting.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good example of how the two feed each other. I did the Frankenstein painting, and it was so funny to me. And I got so excited, and I was like, well, I need the Bride of Frankenstein now. So then I did the Bride of, and I just kind of went on like a tangent.
I would imagine that your, Kathleen says she loves it, and it's great.
Thank you.
I would imagine that your students are very appreciative for such hands-on work, because I mean, it's one thing to just talk about and say what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And another thing to like, okay, now I'm going to show you.
Exactly. And that for me came really directly out of my educational experience, both with things that I loved and things I was really frustrated by. A lot of my very first painting classes, there were basically like no demos, and so I would get like, we would be talking about atmospheric perspective, and
no pictures of how,
or my professor gave me like a black and white Xerox like packet on atmospheric perspective. And so I'm like reading it, and it's like, okay, so things become less defined as they go back in space, and they become bluer. And I was just like, it's one of those things where it was like I could maybe repeat back the concept, but I was like, well, how do I make that? Like, how do I put that into a painting though? Like, I just add blue, or like, what is that?
Right.
Like, how do I actually do that? And so I feel like a lot of my like first parts of undergrad, I was just sort of, being given sort of handouts like that, and then trying to like flail around and figure it out, on my own.
Were other students like complaining? I would have complained for sure.
Yeah,
we were. This is great, but show me.
Yeah, we were, but it's like, we had some of the different professors just had totally different focuses. One of my professors, like at that point, was primarily making like digital works, wasn't really like painting very much anymore. And so I don't know. And,
I start to question whether they even could do it. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. But when I went to grad school, one of the really cool things about LCAT is that there is such a focus on technique, and I was able to be in some of these classes where I was seeing these very hands-on demos, going from like the whole paint mixing process, like how do you establish your palette, like mixing out the paint, mixing out the different values. And when you have those different like values and colors mixed out for yourself, it's kind of like if you're going up to a piano, you have all the keys there, right? And the keys are ready to use.
Right.
All
the ones you need.
Yeah.
And not the ones you don't need.
Yeah. And a lot of what I did before was just mixing everything with my brush, and my palette was just like all over the place, which is whatever, but I didn't really know another option. And then when I saw another option, and learning like how to paint mix and how to set up my palette in a systematic way, it was like, oh, this is so much easier. Now I can like have these things, which takes a bit of time to set it up, but then when you go to paint, it's like you have this freedom to like just place and
also all the colors are harmonious at that point as well, because you mix them all in that realm. Right.
Yeah. And so that I do a lot of that with my students, and I always tell them like, what I'm showing you is an option. it's not that this is the right way to paint. There isn't a right way, right? But here's an option, and it gives you kind of a systematic approach, and it can free you when you go to paint to be able to just think about placing that paint and playing with the paint versus like every single time trying to be like, how do I mix that color again?
Right.
Oh no, I have a little bit of that other color mixed in my, everything's
totally
becoming mud.
This is my life. I totally do it that way. I always have to make myself like a little note on my palette about which colors I use to make that. Otherwise,
right.
Or I hope that I can see them because I haven't mixed it that well.
Right. Right.
I need.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your work. So a lot of your work has your self-portraits in it, which we've already talked about before. Do you continue to work in that manner with inserting yourself into a lot of things?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I've done a lot of like, I've been doing a lot of drawing on, I'm on break right now from teaching. We're on our winter break. So I've been doing a lot of like these sort of like surrealist self-portraits recently. I've been really interested in like the myth of Medusa. So I've been reading a lot about Medusa and kind of integrating that with these like personal memories. I don't know. Medusa I thought was so interesting because there's this kind of first image that we have of her, right? Of like kind of like a monster, right? With the snakes on the head and everything and turning people into stone. But like looking at the myth and the details of it, it's like Medusa was initially just a normal woman. And then she was raped by Poseidon. Horrible. And then Athena turned Medusa into the Medusa that we know of.
The snakes in her head.
And there's like different thoughts on that. Maybe it was like a form of punishment, or it might have been a way to protect Medusa. But she was kind of transformed into this monstrous image that we have of her, right? And then with Medusa being later slain, she was just like existing, and then Perseus just comes in and like beheads her because he was given this quest essentially. And it's been this really interesting thing that I've been thinking about because it's made me think about like, this really traumatic thing happened and she was transformed by that. And it's been making me think about how do we define like what a monster is? Like what's monstrous, right? There's something that can like look monstrous on paper, on the surface, like Medusa. But if you think about like all the other players in the story, there's a lot more like monstrous things happening with other players like Poseidon or Perseus, right? And so I don't know, I've been really fascinated by that, and I love the image of snakes on the head. And I can show you this. So I did this whole like kind of gouache painting on Medusa.
She uses this big, but I just want to say she uses this big like watercolor journal as a journal, so to speak, as an art journal.
I like to be able to like go in with gouache, and then I like drawing with ballpoint pen onto the watercolor paper too. And so I was thinking about this Rubens painting of Medusa. It's this like Medusa's head and all these snakes are coming out. And it's just like an epic and strange painting. And it's both very like there's carnage, it's very visceral, but it's also there's elements of it that are like whimsical and funny. Like there's this little salamander in this painting that just looks like so jaunty, and it's so strange because you see this whole painting with all this like beheaded carnage, and then there's this happy little salamander. And there's something about that to me that I found so interesting. And so I don't know, there's ways too that I've been thinking about the myth of Medusa and things that have happened to me in my own life, and how like, experiences of trauma can make you feel like the other and like a monster, right? And so I've been thinking about like kind of using different mythological stories and tying that in with like personal stories.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's a really interesting angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna give that
yeah,
back
of
to you.
course. Yeah, so the self-portraits are definitely still I do a lot of them, and then I've been doing some like portraits of my mom as well. I think because my mom passed away like about a year ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So here's another self-portrait with like a snake. I'm kind of imagining this whole Medusa series. And for me, this snake also kind of starts to symbolize different things. So it can symbolize that trauma. I've also thought of like my eating disorder as like a monster or a snake. And then I've also thought of how like I actually really love reptiles. I love snakes. So there's both like to me there can be this thing where it's like, oh, you think of it as monstrous, but I also think of it as actually beautiful.
They're such symbols of power too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And they're so different from us that it feels unsettling sort of,
Yeah.
you know.
Foreign.
Yeah, but I don't think it has to be monstrous necessarily, you know.
Exactly, just different.
Yeah.
Just different.
Yeah. And for me too, like with thinking about this snake as kind of almost like a personal symbol for my like eating disorder, I've been doing these portraits of both me and my mom, and the snake also to me kind of I think of this kind of like family lineage, right? And on my mom's side of the family, there's been like generations of these eating disorders. And for me, like I consider myself in more of a state of like recovery. It's always like sort of a little bit tumultuous, but I'm in a much better place now, and so I'm able to like I think look at it from a different vantage point and start to understand like why did this develop, right?
Probably from a more compassionate place, maybe.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, for both like myself and for my mom too, you know, like understanding what was going on like with her and like her relationship with her mom, like going way back, you know. So
I think understanding that and remembering that adage that everybody has with therapy, you know, your parents only did as well as they could, you know, with the information that they had.
Yeah.
And that, you know, you get to reverse it or move it in a different direction if you want to.
Yeah. I'm also now at the age that my mom was when she had me, you know, which is like I don't know, it's just sort of interesting and sort of crazy to think about, you know. And yeah, I think like I definitely think about that history in a different way, and my parents in a different way, which I think is healthy, you know. Yeah.
Tell me about this picture that's behind us. It's rather large and it's quite lovely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and get you guys over here.
So this is actually
I want to try and get the whole thing.
This was a really cool opportunity for me because this was a really big painting commission, but I was given like pretty much like free reign. So the guy who commissioned this, he sent me this really beautiful poem, and then he wanted me to do like a response piece to it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's a nice way to work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
and I love responding to poetry. I love responding to other art forms. So that was really exciting. And I actually have the poem on this other piece right here.
Do you want to read it?
Sure. I'll read it and then I'll kind of explain how the piece connects. So here's the poem. It's as if what is unbreakable, the very pulse of life, waits for everything else to be torn away. And then in the bareness that only silence and suffering and great love can expose, speaks through us and to us. It seems to say, if you want to hold on to nothing, you need to know love and let in everything. If you want to feel the presence of everything, stop counting the things that break along the way. So I thought that was a really beautiful
Now, did you just
poem.
make this piece to like remember the poem by?
Yeah, I made this piece because originally I was going to put the poem into the sky, but it felt, I have like portions of it.
I see the word presence here,
yeah,
and like little pieces.
Yeah, but I didn't like when the words were kind of dominating everything, and I wanted it to be more, I guess, like mysterious. So I thought that poem was really gorgeous, and so and it also kind of gets into this, like, I don't know, for me, when Cody reached out and wanted me to make this painting, this was like right after my mom had passed away, and I was really kind of like in this intense grief stage, and there's something about that poem that really kind of like made a lot of sense to me. It still does, but especially at that time. And so what I actually did, I'd seen this incredible sunset in like the Smith Rock area, and I saw this sunset just a couple of days after my mom had passed away, and I had this kind of experience seeing the sunset where it was so beautiful and kind of overwhelming, like almost like a painful kind of beauty, right? And I just like felt like, it was like I felt like the presence of my mom, like in this like sky. I didn't really know any other way of like saying that, and I don't really have like specific ideas on like what happens to us after we die, but it was just like this very intense feeling, right? And so for me, I decided to like paint that moment, and I really wanted that feeling of like the sky kind of overtaking everything. Yeah, so that's what, and this like took months. For months, it was like sitting on my easel, and I would sort of wrestle with it. I would do one thing, and then, you know, when you have a huge piece like this, you back away, and then you're like, oh, like it's
right, you don't
totally
know.
lopsided now. Yeah. So yeah.
I love the colors in it. I especially love this movement down here, like this yucca or whatever it is.
Thank you.
It's yummy.
Yeah.
Is it finished?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So when are they getting it?
He's gonna get it really soon. I have to like take it off the stretcher bars and roll it up and mail it. But yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
How far away is it going?
He's in Santa Barbara. So.
Oh, it's not too bad. You can even take a drive out there.
Yeah, we'll see.
And do that. It's really beautiful, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of commission work?
Yeah, kind of like ebbs and flows, but yeah, I try to now be like pretty picky about it. Like this was like really, really ideal because, you know, there's such an openness to it. The other landscape over there is also
Do you mind if I get it?
Yeah.
Is there a kitty? I'm sorry, kitty. I felt something.
Yeah, that big one. Yeah. That was also a commission. That was actually from a writer who, she lives in LA, but she has a place out here. And she just had seen my landscape work and just, asked me to do a Joshua Tree landscape, but was also like very open about it.
I bring it a little closer.
Yeah.
There's a real sheen on it, so the light makes it sort of tough to see.
Yeah. So that's like the type of commission I take at this point. It's like if someone really likes my work and they want something kind of more like generally, but they're giving me creative freedom, you know. I will not do any more pet portraits.
Pet portraits?
No.
I love pet portraits.
I love pet portraits too, but just not when people
totally
send me terrible photos.
Oh, you know. Terrible photos are awful.
Yeah.
I love the colors that you use on this, and I can
Yeah.
see that this is part of your palette work.
Mm-hmm.
That your attention to the palette and to making sure that the colors are harmonious, because it really is.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I love these purples. They just really pop, especially against the orange.
Thank
so
you
lovely.
so much. Yeah.
You're welcome. I mean, I am a big fan of your work.
Thank
Make
you.
no mistake. There was a
Thank you,
reason why
Natalie.
I picked you out that day. Is there anything else you'd like me to pull off the wall and talk
We
about?
can grab that one, sure.
This one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another self-portrait.
Yeah.
Put this down here. Kitty, you can come back. All right. So here's a self-portrait. Let's talk about what you were thinking when you were doing this.
Yeah, so this is called Dreaming in Cerulean Blue and Kodachrome Magenta. I was thinking about like the skies out here in Joshua Tree are just so stunning.
They're big.
Yeah, big, and then also we get this really interesting effect where we get this like gorgeous like cerulean blue and Kodachrome magenta sort of sunsets, not on the sunsetting side but on the opposing side, which I feel like is maybe a high desert thing. There's like something with the light quality that happens.
I know.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, I mean, living out here, it's like you're in this huge expanse of sky, and I just wanted to capture that sort of there's like a dreaminess to it, you know. Yeah. And I don't know. Also, I'm really inspired by a lot of like the botanical forms out here. So these are like little parts of a creosote branch. Some of the like yellow blooms that happen when it rains, and we get these little blooms that come up.
The Joshua trees, the hills, the Joshua everything trees. About it.
Yeah. And so I think it's just sort of like celebrating that. Yeah.
Quite lovely.
Thank you.
I saw some commentary pop up. So
awesome.
Yeah, let me hang this.
Let's check it out.
Stay here. Let's see what's going on. Okay. Swipe left to reveal comments. Okay, so beautiful painting, very talented young woman. That's from Kathleen White. Her work is beautiful. That's Georgia. Hi, Georgia. People just popping in and just loving what you're doing.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I have some other paintings here too.
Pull them out.
Yeah. So these are paintings that also started as like demos in some of my classes.
Get that sheen off.
Yeah, it's like a glossy varnish. So this I was actually like, I had such a fun time with, because I was doing all these limited palette studies with my intermediate painting class. And this one I was having them do sort of strange triad paintings. So with the initial triads that we tried out, just doing some version of like a red, yellow, and blue as a limited palette. And for these, I had them also select just secondary colors. So they had to choose a purple, orange, and green.
Yeah.
And so this was like a warm version of that. This was a quinacridone violet, a neon orange from Gabka Paints, which I really love. And then I think I did a cadmium green. And what I loved about this, it was so cool as a painting challenge, because, I found with that I was able to mix something that felt like a yellow, even though I didn't have any sort of pure starting yellow on my palette.
How did you get that? Did you use white? You use white too.
There's white as well, yeah.
Okay.
But I got that through the combination of neon orange and cadmium green, which are both very warm, right?
Right.
So it was just like one of those like interesting, like you take a limitation and then you find out the scope of it, and you can also find like, wow, I could mix that. Like, I didn't know I could mix that from this combination. This was like a really similar thing to that. So this was also just a purple, an orange, and a green, but here it was a really cool combination of colors. So I had a phthalo green, I had an ultramarine violet, and then I had a cadmium orange, which is like the one bit of warmth there. But I was able to like get this like blue from that. And you know, the phthalo green and ultramarine violet are both very cold. So you can find a mixture in between them that does feel like more of a pure blue, which I just thought was, I don't know, it's just one of those moments where you're like playing with colors. And again, it's like finding that limitation can actually, giving yourself that limited palette can actually be this very like interesting thing where you push yourself into things that you wouldn't necessarily find out with having all of the colors there. Yeah.
Just because I'm curious,
Mhm.
and I'm hoping, Kathleen's asking, are these in oil?
Yeah.
These are in oil, yes.
Yeah.
So just because I'm curious, so I mean, do you set yourself up in your palette the same way you would in anything else? I mean, you make you have your three colors, and then you find all the combinations that you think you'd like to use?
I don't always do like a triad palette. That I got interested in doing that because I wanted to do that challenge with my intermediate students.
Mm-hmm.
So I had them try all different triads. So we tried like a Zorn palette of like Mars
I was going to
Black.
ask you about
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And actually have, this
Yours.
is the a Zorn palette painting.
You know, and I remember working with a Zorn palette, and we were all amazed that we could get some sort of blue out of the black.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's kind of like about context, right? So like it can appear bluish because of everything else. And like you can also get like pretty nice greens. Like that was a surprising thing for me.
So the Zorn palette, refresh my memory. It's yellow ochre.
Yellow ochre, cadmium red, and usually like a Mars Black. Though, you know, sometimes I've used other blacks too. And then white. Yeah. And you know, that like this is definitely not like very like a typical palette for me, but it was fun to do, and it was something that like I would do it again. I also did this on top of a Namthal red ground, so you can see little points of like more red vibrancy coming through. That's like that initial red ground.
You cheated.
I like working on red. It's a nice surface. So, but I don't always do like just the three. Like
I'm sure.
Yeah.
You open it up some.
Yeah.
But I just find it so interesting working in just three colors.
It is, yeah. It's really cool. Yeah. Because it just stretches you in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
You start to think like, how can I mix that? And then you can always kind of go like, you can go right up to your limitation, right? Where you realize like, I'm really not getting the color I want. Maybe now I need to add in like a cerulean blue or, you know, something. But yeah, that limitation forces you to be creative in your mixing decisions. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, other than thinking about the Medusa series that you've got playing in your head, I mean, do you have an idea of where you'd like to take all of this?
So I find for myself, I often go off on like different creative tangents. Mm-hmm. So the Medusa series is like one of them that I'm really kind of imagining as a larger show coming together.
A painting show.
Yeah, painting and prints as well. And like some of these drawings. So, and then I also like, let's see.
I was going to say, we didn't even talk about your print work.
Yeah. Well, and so this is like, here, I'll first show you, this is a dry point of, it's a dry point that started with one of the Medusa drawings I had done, and I fleshed it out more in this dry point intaglio.
Can you please talk about what dry point is exactly?
Yeah, so for dry point, you're taking a sharp tool and you're creating scratches on either like a metal plate, or often what I do is I use plexiglass. So this is like a circular piece of plexiglass, and all of the marks here are created by scratching into that surface. Wherever you scratch, that can then later hold ink. So I scratched in my whole drawing, and then I took my plate and I rubbed ink into all of those scratches, and I wiped off the excess ink. And then I put this through an etching press with damp paper to get the impression.
To pull the paint out of the creases.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Did I see that you actually had one of your plates?
Yeah,
around?
this is the plate.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see that this is a piece of.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that better? That might be, well, sort of. You can sort of see better. Yeah. All right. So it's just a piece of plastic and then etched into it.
Yeah.
She scratches.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, where do you teach?
I teach at Copper Mountain College, which is a community college here in Joshua Tree. And then before I taught at Copper Mountain, I taught at all different colleges throughout Los Angeles and Orange County. And then I felt just really lucky to get here. So my husband is a climbing guide. And so he was guiding out here, and I was living in Los Angeles and teaching out there. And then a teaching position opened up here in Joshua Tree for a full-time art professor. So I've now been teaching here for about 2 years.
I'm supremely jealous that the people here get to have your expertise. It would definitely be one of the things that I would be doing.
Yeah.
What is in the middle of the Medusa head?
That's those are snakes.
The baby snakes, waiting to be born?
Yeah. And I was thinking of snakes in the brain, snakes in the neural network. And again, that was kind of thinking about the snake being this, symbol of that kind of different traumas, right?
The monsters within.
Yeah. And so this is also showing a snake wrapping around this kind of childlike form, and then the a child in this cocoon, and then those snakes going kind of infiltrating.
Yeah. George is asking, who did you study with? Anybody in particular you want to call out?
Yeah. So I mentioned Sharon Alicati before. She was one of my main mentors at Laguna College of Art and Design, and is still a huge inspiration for me, and a really good friend at this point. And then also Peter Zakowski, who still is the chair of the master's program at LCAD, and he's an incredible painter. And those are some of the, I guess, main people that had kind of the biggest impact on me. But there were a lot of different people. So Cynthia Sitton, who's in Orange County, another amazing figurative painter. Luis Serrano, who taught several classes in my master's program, and he had a really poetic sort of viewpoint on painting that was really beautiful. So yeah, those are some of the main people.
Is there anybody outside of school now that inspires you? I don't want to say real life, but in regular life, not school life.
Of people, yeah. I mean, yeah. Out here, this is the high desert area is such a amazing concentration of
it's
artists.
It's a hub.
Yeah, and it's a hub, and it's very warm. It's very welcoming. So I've met some incredible artists out here that are just super inspiring. So one is Melissa Lakey, who's a painter, and she does a lot of these very whimsical illustrative pieces. John Flores, who's now a friend of mine. He's an amazing ceramicist. And his pieces are so gorgeous. I just want to bite them. They're so good. He does these beautiful ceramic sort of celestial cacti. Ooh. And it will look so for example, one will look just sort of almost like a saguaro at first, and you'll get up close and you'll notice the saguaro has these little toes, or a little face or something. It's very interesting. So those are a couple of artists that I've met out here that are just amazing. And I just met them like at a, local cafe. There's just like an artist group. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What else you got there?
So these are a bunch of, I've been getting into all of these, like making linoleum block patches.
Am I holding it right side? Or does it go like this?
Like that, yeah.
Okay.
So as like a Christmas present for my husband this year, he's a climber, so he gets
Mountain climber, just in case you wanted to know.
Yeah, rock climber, and he gets all these holes in his pants. So I made, I patched up a bunch of his pants with these like linoleum block prints. So for these, I carved into linoleum block. I printed it onto this like canvas patch with a fabric linoleum block ink. You just have to let it dry for a week, and then it's totally good to go and permanent. And yeah,
you can see the image of a moth.
Yeah.
And then the image of a skull with a flower. I hope you could see that.
And the first, here's one of the first ones I made. I made ones for Tyler that had our cat Finley on them. And then I just it's another one of those tangent things. I
like the way you finished it.
Yeah, too. Yeah. Nice. So I had it as an idea to make for Tyler as this gift. And then I made several patches just for Tyler with our cat. And then I did it and I was like, this is amazing. So I started I made recently probably 5 different blocks. And now I want to put them all over my clothing.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
They're fun.
Yeah.
They're so fun.
Thank you.
Ugh. Yeah. So fun. Okay, let me see. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. What is in the middle of Medusa's head? Where does she teach? Are those painting? Yep. Okay, we got everything all covered there.
Awesome.
Okay. I don't know how we're doing on time. Let's see. Oh, we're there. We're there. All right. Well, I want to give you some last things to say.
Yeah.
If you could offer encouragement to people on the outside that are looking to improve their work, what would you say to them? I mean, what do you want people to know?
Totally. I think one of the biggest things is just, and it's also something I tell my students, is just practice and putting in the time and having patience with yourself. I think it's something I struggled with in grad school, and a lot of my friends did too. We all felt kind of imposters, having imposter syndrome, we weren't good enough, or it can be really toxic when you start comparing yourself to other people and feeling like this is what I should, where I should be. And I think just abandoning all of those shoulds, and just sort of having that patience, practicing, I think it can be helpful, kind of giving yourself maybe a goal to work towards, but at the same time, letting go of the feeling of oh, I should be here and I'm not, because that kind of takes you out of the moment, and that can take you out of your creativity, and it can make you stop wanting to make anything at all, So I think when I was in that kind of headspace, it was really helpful to just sort of reconnect with thinking about my imagination and creativity and going there.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful advice.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate it.
All right, you guys. Does she have a website?
Yes, it's just allredchloe.com.
And that's ALLREDCHLOE.com.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Okay. I'll put it up later too, so that you guys can take a look at it. Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, that was it. Okay. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Yay,
I'll see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.